Welcome back to Morning Glory, 22 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham. Tom Slater is here with us from SpikedOnline. Sun front page this morning goes slightly different. They've got a bit of Zelensky on the front, but their fat jab story. They're saying fat jabs are now linked to 82 deaths. Official figures of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency reveal the toll is up to the end of January. Disclosure comes as a Sun reporter paid £280 for 4 doses of Mounjaro without any checks. I was reading a story at the weekend, I think, Tom, in which it said that drug dealers now, who sort of will more or less happily supply with any kind of street drug, from cannabis to cocaine to whatever else they've got, they're now selling fat jabs as well, apparently. I don't know where they're getting them.
No, absolutely. You've got to question your priorities as well if you're waiting in a car park at 2 a.m. trying to get some fat jabs.
I think it would be surely one of the things you would say with pretty much surety that if you're buying fat jabs from an illegal drug dealer, you're really possibly putting your life in danger.
Absolutely. It
might maybe best not to do that.
I know there's a lot of layers to this story, isn't there? Because in terms of the question of the deaths, it seems a lot of this has to do with diabetics being kind of prescribed them needlessly or in a wrong-headed fashion. There's also the kind of ongoing question about whether or not if you've got the NHS who's done a huge order of Mounjaro in particular, whether or not that's kind of filtering through in some way in relation to the black market. I mean, this Sun reporting managed to go buy them.
Nicking boxes, loads of it or something.
Yeah, they seem to have made such a huge order, maybe it's not inconceivable that some of that might have taken place.
I mean, the way the NHS is run, it wouldn't surprise you, would it, if you were putting a bit like that scene in Goodfellas when they're putting a load of boxes of stuff in a room and somebody's at the other end of it taking them out the other side, putting it in the back of a lorry.
Absolutely. There's certainly the demand for it. But because that was one thing that's been made in the piece, was the fact that this is something that you shouldn't be able to acquire necessarily that easily. You should go in, it should be a point of discussion, is this the right course and whatever. But that's not necessarily the case when it can filter out to the black market.
No, that is the problem. And then the Mail, let's do that as a front page as well, because this is a story that's been rumbling on for a while, ever since that controversial BBC documentary. I think it aired last Monday on BBC Two, and it was then put up on the iPlayer. Obviously, the story started with a journalist doing investigations as to who the boy was who was in it. It turned out he was the son of a Hamas government minister. The front page of the Mail now saying, a question from Kemi Badenoch to the BBC boss, Tim Davie, was licence fee payers' cash actually given to Hamas to make this documentary?
No, absolutely. I mean, if you're in a situation in which the star of your documentary is a member of a Hamas family, I mean, we all know how these things are done. People don't always take part in these documentaries out of the kindness of their own heart, particularly if they're living in a war-stricken part of the world. So this could easily be true. The fact that, again, licence fee payers' money was paid to this production company, who then will have paid the people that they worked with. And surely this has got to be a time in which the BBC, but also a lot of media in general, drop the kind of naivety they have when they're operating in that part of the world. The Gaza Strip is ruled under an iron fist by Hamas. They're tightly controlling the information that's coming in and coming out of there. But the BBC isn't the only journalists who've been caught out by this. No. Companies who have been found to employ people who have been very sympathetic to Hamas in the past, if not outright members. This keeps happening time and time again. It's particularly infuriating, I suppose, when it's taxpayers' money.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. And, of course, the storm is over because the two different versions of events that the BBC gave. Initially, they basically said that they had thorough and complete control over all the editorial matters compared in the documentary. Then later they said actually that wasn't the case. They effectively bought this thing in from an organisation I think called Hoyo. Suggests the corporation had direct and regular involvement, with one section reading, "We will address editorial compliance issues as they arise by having regular updates and phone calls with the commissioning editor." But except it seems as though it's all a bit woolly, that. It looks as though they've kind of, they've not been as diligent as they ought to have been. And you have to ask the question, don't you? Is it them not being clever enough, or is it them actually wanting it to be a success, therefore they don't ask any questions?
Yeah, or them just kind of being carried along by their own biases. They see the thing, they naturally assume this must be all completely above board. You can't suspend your usual journalistic checks and due diligence just because you are more sympathetic to a certain story than the other.
Also, to be honest,
the story could turn out to be nonsense, or from a source that you wouldn't necessarily
And
want
if you
to
are
trust.
actually commissioning something like this, and you are going to, do what is likely to be a sympathetic documentary about people living in Palestine, surely the first question you'd say is, can we make sure that this boy who's going to narrate the story doesn't have any connections to any terrorist organisations? Wouldn't that be like point A?
You would think so.
On the contract?
It's not much to ask, is it?
It's really not. Just make sure he doesn't have any connections. Oh, his dad happens to be in Hamas. Great. Okay then, marvellous. Maybe we shouldn't use him then. Let's talk about petrol and oil and gas and all of that, because Keir Starmer was up in Grangemouth, was up in Scotland yesterday, despite the fact that him being Prime Minister has completely almost destroyed Anas Sarwar's chances of now being First Minister of Scotland. He was up there sort of doing a kind of a pep rally for him. But the story that really caught my eye this morning is BP, which is now called Beyond Petroleum, faces an existential crisis after a ruinous attempt to go green. They're now facing humiliation as the oil industry's biggest loser on net zero. This was all introduced by a bloke, you might remember him, Bernard Looney, who had to step down from his job because of some inappropriateness that he got involved in, right? But he decided to reimagine his company as a champion of green energy. Now, this was a few years ago, right? And ever since then, they've just been on a sort of continual spiral downwards, and they're now on the brink of being taken over by some hedge fund in Florida who have been acquiring loads and loads of their shares. And they're probably now going to have to go back to drilling for oil and gas because the rest of it isn't working.
It's so telling, isn't it? Like, it's the sort of green equivalent of go woke and go broke.
Totally.
I mean, that's one thing that is undervalued, I guess, about the whole green turn, the mad embrace of these extreme environmental policies, is it's not just been a case of the government kind of browbeating the fossil fuel companies. They've embraced this pretty happily, many of them, and they're now starting to realise that a lot of these technologies, these green technologies they were pursuing,
they just don't work.
And therefore aren't going to turn the profit for them. That a lot of them have probably just been, you know, getting used to a lot of the subsidies being thrown their way by government rather than what they're actually making.
But this guy
it's not good. It's clear. It's like pushing water up a hill. It just doesn't work.
This guy seems to have single-handedly destroyed the company from within, right? Here's what he said, right? His net zero promises included that by 2030, BP would boost investment in renewables tenfold from $500 million to $5 billion, building wind farms and solar parks with a capacity of 50 gigawatts, roughly enough to supply the whole of the UK on a windy and sunny day. They would slash oil and gas production from the equivalent of 2.6 million barrels of oil a day to 1.5 million. I mean, you know, and look, I don't know if you can see this, but you can basically see the curve here. It's just going down. I mean, that is the size of the problem they've got. Just extraordinary that they would even do this. But let's have a look at Keir Starmer, because this is even funnier for me. Keir Starmer was up at this Labour Party conference yesterday, trying to give Anas Sarwar a big boost. Lots of empty seats in the back of the room, by the way. Here's what he had to say about jobs in Scotland at Grangemouth.
Grangemouth is such an opportunity. It could have a future in bioengineering, biofuels, or in hydrogen energy. But I promise you this, it will not lack ambition on our side, because the political road ahead is about one thing and one thing only: delivering change that the working people of Scotland can feel. That is how we serve the people of Scotland. That is how we will win again in 2026 and make Anas Sarwar the First Minister of Scotland, in a Britain that puts working people first.
First, right? They're actually shutting Grangemouth, right? So the idea that he introduces Grangemouth as a great opportunity, you're kind of going, sorry, at no point did you mention you're shutting it down. Slightly earlier, he talks about making people redundant, looking after them and giving them 18 months' money, and telling other companies to rehire them. But nevertheless, the bottom line is, the headline is they're shutting Grangemouth. No,
absolutely, and they've got to fess up to this eventually. I mean, there was an opportunity.
How can you talk such absolute and utter BS?
It was funny. Extraordinary. Anas Sarwar, I know people listening won't have noticed this, but Anas Sarwar was just sat there very stony-faced during that. He didn't seem convinced by what Keir Starmer was saying.
Well, you wouldn't be, would you?
If you were a half-sensible Labour government, there would be a real opening in Scotland on this issue of net zero and whatnot, because of the fact that you had the SNP, who were of course in bed with the Greens. They were having to again kind of completely kind of wage war against their own domestic fossil fuel industry in order to keep that coalition on the ground. It would and also you had a lot of the unions, who of course still very important to the Labour Party, who were raising the alarm about how this was going to hit jobs, talking about this as like a kind of new moment of closing the coal mines and so on. It would have been a sensible Labour Party that wasn't so in hock to kind of Ed Milibandism would have been able to seize this and rode it to victory.
Because it's really the only decent-sized proper oil refinery in the UK, and they're shutting it down. And people have said, even if they kept it open to use it for creating, you know, whatever you call it, biofuel, that would be something. But they're not even doing that. They're just shutting it.
And also this idea that it's like, oh, we're going to, you know, destroy this part of our industry, we're going to destroy this part of our energy infrastructure, but, you know, just because we're going to open a crazy golf course in the middle of it or whatever, that's fine. Of course it's going to cost jobs, of course it's going to cost the country. And when you've got a Labour Party that claims it cares about energy security and stepping up to the plate in an uncertain world, destroying your own energy resources and infrastructure is clearly not a good idea.
Well, I mean, have a look at what happened to BP. And maybe that's a lesson in how not to actually ruin the country, because if it's ruined BP, you can sure as hell bet that it will ruin the country as well. I actually hit a new record at the weekend. I managed to fill my car with petrol and pay more than £100 to do so.
That's a grim milestone.
I know, it used to come in around about, I think 80 is about as much as I paid. But I think I found the most expensive petrol station in Sussex. I don't know how I ended up there, but I sort of pulled into it. It was £1.89. For the more, it's like the higher octane stuff, the 97 Plom or whatever it's called, 101 quid to fill the car. Absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, there we are. That's my fault. I don't blame anybody else, but maybe you can find out if there's anything. How would it be 189? That seems ridiculously high. I know many of you out there can find me prices for petrol, so if you can find it any higher than that, do let me know.